Hello and welcome to another edition of Only in Illinois, your weekly video recap from Reboot Illinois. I'm Madeline Duback here with Matt Dietrich, and this week we had quite a show in Springfield when there was a big fight over raising the eligibility requirements for child care assistance in Illinois. The governor on Monday backtracked on a couple of things and raised the limits so that more working parents could qualify for the assistance after he had lowered them in July quite a bit. And Democrats wanted to go ahead and pass a law anyway to stop him and future governors from being able to change these eligibility requirements on a whim, so to speak. And so there was a big debate about that, and one state representative, Ken Dunkin of Chicago, a Democrat, sided with the governor and Republicans essentially by walking away and not voting, which is something you might recall he did back with an AFSCME arbitration bill when they were trying to take away the governor's ability to negotiate with unions.
That was on September 2nd. He didn't even show up then. He wasn't even in town.
He was in New York.
This time he was in the Capitol, but didn't vote on either of the two bills that the Democrats really wanted to pass. The reason they wanted to pass them was they wanted to send a signal to Bruce Rauner of strength, that if you are going to mess with these human services programs that are important to us, we're going to take away your power to do so entirely. Well, Governor Rauner sort of beat them to the punch. On Monday, he undid his child care change and said he wasn't going to change another rule that would have taken away home health care services for a lot of people. And so Dunkin decided that makes the bill moot, and then he sort of represented himself as the person who negotiated this
Convinced the governor to do this.
And
whereas the governor put out a release initially that said, it gave him some credit, but also said social service and child care providers were in agreement with this.
Now, this puts Dunkin in a politically difficult place because his constituents and the advocates for the child care providers and for health care really they were not happy at all with him. And they showed up. Here's a little video.
Because he had promised.
And here's some video of him encountering some of those advocates at the Capitol.
Denise, there was a deal cut by the governor and the Senate sponsor.
And we know you were instrumental
in
it.
I played my role.
But you also pledged to vote yes on Senate Bill 5.
And so when we come down here and we make deals, and I was a co-sponsor. I am a co-sponsor. Listen. Well, you can't have everything. There's a deal that was made. The governor reversed it yesterday, and it's going to go back to a full 185 next week. That's a victory. Ain't no but. That's a victory.
So he, by not casting that vote, he made some enemies in the advocate community. And here's at a press conference afterwards, House Speaker Michael Madigan devoted a considerable chunk of press conference time to letting the advocates freely go after Ken Dunkin, and here's one of them.
Let me be clear that no one bears more responsibility today for the defeat of this legislation, which protected or protects our children and child care and home care in Illinois, than Representative Ken Dunkin himself.
Okay, so the big question here, Ken Dunkin now has crossed Michael Madigan 3 times. Once in September and then on these 2 bills as well.
And so why should people watching this from all over Illinois, why should they pay attention to what happens with Ken Dunkin?
Well, because Ken Dunkin is making a statement that I don't work for Mike Madigan, and now what we're going to find out is Michael Madigan, who is also the chairman of the Democratic Party in Illinois, is he going to get behind getting a candidate in the Democratic primary in the 5th House District to challenge Ken Dunkin? Now, Ken Dunkin has been in the General Assembly since December of 2002. He won his last election with 83% of the vote. That is a huge landslide.
Well, and Mike Madigan traditionally, historically, has always supported his incumbents.
Right. But this is the first time that I think anyone there can recall a member of that caucus going so directly against Madigan, so vocally, and then Ken Dunkin, after not making these votes and causing these bills to fail by one vote each, he then sort of went on a publicity tour in which he emphasized that I don't work for Mike Madigan, and I made a deal with the governor and I held up my end. This is Ken Dunkin appearing the next night on Chicago Tonight with host Carol Marine.
Your one vote killed it. Why?
Well, first of all, the governor worked out a compromise with myself along with the Senate sponsor. And guess what? Everyone won. We got the child care funding and the eligibility restored. That was the purpose and the goal of my negotiation with the governor, my insistence on him to restore these funding, this eligibility.
Dunkin is obviously, he's going to stand behind his vote. He's not contrite, and he seems to be getting more combative toward Michael Madigan. So, as you said, Madeline, this is the big question. Will Madigan mount a primary challenger? But this is kind of complicated this year.
It's much more complicated than it's ever been, which is why this really just became one race for everyone to watch. And there are a couple of different reasons why. So one of them is it's going to be a great lesson in what goes on with super PACs in the state, right, Matt?
Right, because there are two super PACs right now. One of them is called Illinois Go, and it was started ostensibly to support Democratic candidates who needed to make, as they put it, difficult decisions, which is sort of shorthand for voting for pension reform, voting for some of the things that traditionally Democrats haven't voted for. Some
to
people
kind of get
believe,
the state's finances back in order.
Right.
Some people believe that it's really an organization supportive of Governor Rauner.
right, that it's just a front that calls itself a Democratic organization. The other one is that there is a more directly supportive of Rauner super PAC called Turnaround Illinois. Now, these organizations, these independent expenditure committees, are forbidden from having any contact with the candidates or their campaign committees. So Bruce Rauner could not, his super PAC couldn't go to Ken Dunkin and say, here's $20,000. But what they could do is they could go put flyers all over his district. They can buy television advertising
They can create
time.
campaign commercials
Right.
and have them aired.
And,
right?
and what they can do in this case, I would suspect, if Ken Dunkin does come up against a primary challenger, is they will portray that challenger as Mike Madigan's puppet. Now, as I said, Ken Dunkin is in a very heavily Democratic district.
Right.
Runs a stripe right down the middle of Chicago. So you're not going to have a Republican take that district. But you have to wonder, is a message of don't vote against, or a vote against Ken Dunkin is a vote for Mike Madigan, is that a strong campaign message? I think it might be.
So another thing that we see from time to time when something like this develops is a number of candidates getting in a particular race to try to dilute the ability of one challenger from beating an incumbent. And so if Mike Madigan and the Democrats were to put up someone who is their candidate to challenge Ken Dunkin, then Illinois Go or someone affiliated with Bruce Rauner or the Republicans could also perhaps independently put up a Democratic candidate to help dilute the votes in that race.
Well, as long as they're not communicating with that candidate and as long as they're not giving help directly to the candidate, it all has to be sort of ancillary, like advertising and marketing, things like that. Sure.
And what about Bruce Rauner directly? What could he's got limits on what he can do?
Bruce Rauner directly could, from his campaign fund, he can give funds to anyone, and he can give $53,900 directly to Ken Dunkin if he wants to.
But not more than that.
Right, not more than that.
Which is a fairly new thing in Illinois. Okay.
Still, $53,900
is a lot of money in a state representative's race. All right, so lots of lessons here about super PACs and games in primaries and political retribution and kind of political spin with the Dunkin publicity tour.
And we'll have to have an answer to the primary question within the next couple of weeks, because
filing deadline,
if you're going to be in the March primary, you have to have all your petitions in by November 30th.
Right. So we'll be watching, and you stay tuned as well. That's it for this week's edition of Only in Illinois. We'll see you next week.